All right, well, as people keep filtering in, I'll kick us off. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Uh, this is the fifth installment of Building a Resilient Food Culture, Lessons from the Pandemic, our food supply chain challenges and opportunities. My name is Adam Morgan. I am the Advocacy Coordinator for Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. We have a great panel and discussion lined up for today, so I will start with a few housekeeping items and then we'll get started. This webinar today is being recorded and will be sent out to all registrants in the coming days. If you'd like to watch any of the previous sessions of this series, you can find them on Food 21's website under resources, and we will show that link on the last slide of the webinar today. Feel free to submit questions and comments throughout the session as the panelists are speaking, and we will reserve the last 10 or 15 minutes to address those questions and comments. All right, today we will be talking about the food supply chain and how we can create a regional food value chain within and for our communities. First, we have Allison Rowland, who is the Manager of Research and Technical Assistance for the Council of Development Finance Agencies and oversees their food systems finance work. Next, we have Graham Watkins, Executive Vice President of Retail Innovation and Business Development for Giant Eagle. He's been leading their curbside pickup and delivery for the past several years and has been working to improve food access in food insecure communities. Next, we have Dave Rinaldo, CEO of Azoti.com, which enables professional food buyers to give their customers more affordability, transparency, and access to locally grown food. And finally, we'll be speaking with Glenn Ford. Sorry, slow on those. Finally, we'll be speaking with Glenn Ford, founder of In-City Farms, where they focus on sustainable organic agriculture, aquaponics, and controlled environment agriculture. They work to improve their communities and reconnect them with the food supply chain. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. First, we'll start with Allison. If you could just tell us a bit about what you do with CDFA and what you are seeing in the food system finance space across the country.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you for having me on this webinar today. My name is Allison Rowland, and I'm a manager with the Research and Technical Assistance team for the Council of Development Finance Agencies. And for those of you not familiar with CDFA, we are a national trade association dedicated to the advancement of all kinds of development finance tools and concerns across the country. So we're national. We just happen to be based in Columbus, Ohio. So I think I might be the only non-Pittsburgh person here, but happy to be here and share a little bit about our work we're doing. So, all right, there we go. That's just our legal disclaimer. Seek professional advice if you need any guidance on this subject matter. All right, so I more specifically work on our food systems initiatives with CDFA, which all started just several years ago, about 5-6 years ago, where we really started researching how traditional development finance tools like bonds, tax increment financing, tax credits, TIF, revolving loan funds, and so on, and how those tools can be more integrated into developing localized and regional food systems, and how these development finance agencies that traditionally administer these sorts of tools, or development finance agencies, or economic development corporations, or even CDFIs, can really improve their financing mechanisms to support these local food endeavors. So throughout this research, we've collected a ton of data, case studies, proving that, bonds are issued all the time for, meat manufacturers or industrial needs when it comes to processing, and revolving loan funds are very widely used to support small businesses and entrepreneurs in the field, and so on. But when we started this research, we had to figure out, well, why isn't this capital flowing so easily to food businesses in some regards, and perhaps more capital is flowing in other spaces in the food system? So when we started this research, we realized, let me take a step back. We wrote a white paper series, which I will share the link with you all today about our sixth and final white paper we just released this past fall, called Advancing Local Food Systems Through Development Finance. And I'm going to really dive into this paper today and talk to you a lot more about that, but I'll share the link in the chat box in just a moment. And so when we started this research and collecting all these case studies, we realized that there's over $1 billion of traditional development financing tools that have been used to develop localized food systems all across the country. And $1 billion is barely scratching the surface. This is just really just skimming the top of the case studies that we found. So there's much, much more out there. But how can we unlock this capital even more? So when we started our research, we looked to the clean energy sector. And what did that sector look like, 20 or so years ago? It was considered a really, really risky investment, whether that be in solar or wind or geothermal or either weatherizing your homes or buildings, whatever it may be. And what happened between, 20 years ago and today for that clean energy sector, energy efficient sector to become one of the most investable asset classes out there is they all band together. They reduce their fragmentation between, people working in solar over here pushing their initiatives forward, and wind, and, so on and so forth. They really band together to develop this asset class. So we started looking at the food system in a similar manner, and noticing that there are all different kinds of players and partnerships involved in the food system. And so we came up with this definition of the food system, these 6 components you see here on the screen. Now, they're not all encompassing, these can overlap a little bit, but generally speaking, these are the 6 biggest components of the food system. So we have social enterprise, so any sort of organization, working to support any sort of social objectives, so like a food bank. Agriculture, that can be rural or urban. Entrepreneurs, any sort of small business in the food system, just very generally speaking, could be, a restaurant or a processor, or and even a farmer would be considered an entrepreneur. Then we have institutional buyers. These are, public or private institutions that purchase large quantities of food at once and really can drive a food system based on the demand. Then we also have industry. And so these are kind of really a broad range of actors that contribute to any sort of production or distribution or retail of food. And then we also have infrastructure, and those are the physical facilities that, are involved in processing, storage, distribution, production, or retail of food as well. So based on these 6 components of the food system, that's when we really started getting into what CDFA does best in the different development finance tools out there, and connecting these different 6 components with the variety of financing tools out there. So we started collecting, data on revolving loan funds and different types of tax credits, whether new markets tax credits or historic tax credits. Where are those going? Want to support which components of the food system? Industrial development bonds, 501c3 bonds, opportunity zones, you name it. It's a whole landscape of traditional financing tools out there. And so some of the case studies that we uncovered, if you will, through our white paper series, I'll share a few of these with you here today. I'm going to go kind of fast through these because you can read all about them in the white papers, and I'll make sure you all get a copy of these slides too if you want to read more. But for example, Jasper Meats is a small meat processor in suburban Chicago. They were issued $3.2 million in industrial development bonds to expand their operation, and they retained a bunch of jobs and created a bunch of new jobs. Iowa has one of the best Aggie bond programs in the country. it's called a beginning farmer loan program, Aggie bonds, they're all the same thing. That's, a great resource. I know in Pennsylvania, you also have a really, really strong Aggie bond program as well. Tax increment financing. There was an entire farmers market created or uplifted, I should say, in downtown Dallas by creating this TIF district and really forcing capital into this district to not only uplift the farmers market there in downtown Dallas, but also attract capital to revitalize the area as a whole. Another great tax increment financing example is La Plaza Tapatia, which is a local Mexican grocer here in central Ohio. And they got a really, really small TIF when they realized that they had some unforeseen infrastructure costs associated with constructing and expanding their grocery store. So $450,000 over 10 years for a TIF is relatively small. But this was the first TIF district that Franklin County, which is where Columbus, Ohio is, ever did. Tax credits, new market tax credits to be specific. Red Lake Trading Post grocery store and was able to expand their location and increase the amount of fresh produce and meat and dairy options in their store by utilizing new market tax credits. Also combined with a USDA business and industry loan guarantee, which was great, created a bunch of new jobs and retained a bunch of jobs. Harvest Return Sustainable Agriculture Opportunity Zone Fund. This was one of the first Opportunity Zone funds designed specifically to raise capital for small and medium-sized farmers and ranchers all across the country. And it's been very diverse in what this fund is invested in, anything from hydroponic produce to cattle farming. Link deposit program, another way to get capital to a grocery store, also located in central Ohio. And this specific program, you have to be able to create a full-time job or save a full-time job for every $50,000 borrowed. So Huffman's Market in Upper Arlington, Ohio, was able to take advantage of this program. And then this last case study I'm just going to touch on real quickly. It's called the Bornstein and Pearl Food Production Center, which was spearheaded by the Dorchester Bay Economic Development Corporation just outside of Boston. They acquired this former meat processing plant called Pearl Meats in a very low-income neighborhood in just outside of Boston with a very, very high unemployment rate. And through this community engagement process, they realized the residents of this neighborhood really wanted job creation. So this, instead of being turned into affordable housing, was turned into a food production campus, including the House of Commonwealth Kitchen, which is a local kitchen incubator and processing facility. This is a holy capital stack here. This was a really interesting program, a lot that went into it to make it happen. You can read more about this in our 6th white paper, like I said. So real quick, I really want to get to the meat here and what CDFA is pushing forward and what communities of all different scales, whether on the local level, regional level, state level, whatever it may be, what your communities need to do to really invest in your local and regional food systems. And number one, we have to reframe our food systems development as critical infrastructure and economic development. We need to build effective relationships and partnerships across the entire food system and not just certain categories, including with development finance agencies and other organizations that could be critical. And we really need a plan for strategic food systems financing. That's something we see is really missing when it comes to planning for local and regional food systems. And so by reframing your food systems development as critical infrastructure and economic development, whether these are cold storage facilities or public markets or small business incubators, whatever it may be, these are critical places where small business activity can happen. And it's a proven driver already of local economies. And so by really starting to understand the different development finance tools that are out there and how they can be applied to a variety of different businesses is critical for local and regional food system restoration. And building these relationships and partnerships across the entire food system, you know, we need to involve a variety of different skill sets. We need to reduce fragmentation and band together. So whether it's with your local CDFI and, you know, development finance agency or nonprofits working in whatever space may be relevant to your project, it's really critical to involve all the available players. And lastly, we need to plan for strategic food systems financing. We've noticed that a lot of communities or you know, cities or states even have some sort of food systems development plan or local food action plan, whatever you want to call it. But there's oftentimes lacking the economic development component or the financing component. So how are you going to pay for these things? So whether these strategic financing plans go alongside existing local food action plans or master plans for city or even economic development planning, these financing plans need to be put in place to really push forward the local and regional food systems efforts. All right, I really sped through that presentation, but if you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or put them in the chat box. I'm happy to chat further about the work we're doing here at CDFA.
Great, thank you so much, Allison. Now we're gonna turn to Graham to give us Giant Eagle's perspective on the pandemic and how the food supply chain looks for the present and into the future. So.
Good afternoon. I'm Graham Watkins with Giant Eagle, and I've been working on the curbside business and the delivery business at Giant Eagle for some time now, but also have had the privilege for the past year working on food insecurity as part of our broader opportunities to help the communities in which we operate. So I'll take a bit of time to explain what we're doing in that space this afternoon and some observations we have about the importance of, you know, getting the supply chain to work effectively for us going forward. So Giant Eagle's been pretty committed to food insecurity for a long time. In the past year alone, we've donated more than 37 million meals to local food organizations. We've traditionally done that through a lot of work with food banking and other nonprofits. We do it with register campaigns. We do it with direct food donations. We've done it with financial donations. We support a lot of local organizations like 412 Food Rescue, and we certainly do it through volunteerism, both of our team members and others. And we've been very proud of that record over the past years. We certainly in the Pittsburgh area, we're one of the major grocery stores. And so we feel like it's important to be able to give back to the community and important that, that giving food is part of that. But in the past year, we've also really thought about the fact that we need to be addressing not just food through giving, but also how can we actually be improving access to food? And so I've gotten to work with a large group of people to think about food access issues. And that's really focused in 3 areas for us initially, and more to come in the long term. But the 3 I want to spend some time on today are community engagement and learning, what we describe as community-based pickup points, and then SNAP acceptance online. So if I spend a moment on community engagement and learning, one of the things that we've spent a good bit of time doing over the past probably 9 months at this point is meeting with community leaders in different parts of Pittsburgh to understand why is food access a challenge? What are the issues? What do they perceive as the issues? What do the communities find to be challenging? And trying to do some learning, I think probably not dissimilar from what Allison described in terms of understanding what is the market? How does it operate? How are people gaining access to food now so that we can craft solutions that might help, but also ensure that we're actually addressing community need in ways in which we're able to do so. And I think we would say all of us who've been involved have been highly educated on this topic over the last 9 months and recognize we have a whole lot more still to learn. But some of the things that we have learned, I think that will come through, and some of the things we'll talk about is that food insecurity is not always just about there's not a grocery store near where I live. It might be that there is one relatively close to where I live, but I don't have the right transportation for it. I don't have a good way to get there. I could take the bus, but that's actually harder than it might sound. I can get on the bus, but then I actually had someone describe to me the other day, but there's limits on the number of people that can be on the bus right now because of COVID restrictions and social distancing. So I can get to the store, get my groceries, get back to the bus stop to get on, find out I can't get back on the bus right now. And now here I am holding all of my groceries. So there's a number of things beyond just the immediate sort of obvious thing that there's not a grocery store immediately near me that make access harder. And I won't spend too much more time going through that now, but hopefully as you see some of the things we've been thinking about, we're trying to address it from a holistic perspective as opposed to just looking at the immediate question of access, because it is, I think generally speaking, a very complicated problem. So getting into a few of the things that we have tried and will continue to try to work with is we think there's potentially an opportunity to use technology to help improve access in a number of different places. So I have a lot of experience and time with the curbside delivery business and the curbside pickup business at Giant Eagle, and having seen how that program has grown. About almost 2 years ago now, we met with the local Lions Club in Tionesta, Pennsylvania. And for those who don't know, that'd be maybe 65, 70 miles south of Erie and probably 40 miles east of I-79 if you were going up. And a relatively small community, 600 or 700 people there, and long without a grocery store or good access to groceries. And so they approached us and said, is there a way that you could help get groceries into the community? It's a fairly long drive and fairly difficult for us to get to it. And so we started a partnership with the Lions Club there. And what we're able to do is use the investments that we already had in curbside to be able to get residents there to be able to order, and then order in advance the night before. We pick and pack the groceries the morning of, and then bring them out, drop them off, and the Lions Club volunteers actually are able to then manage the order and manage that all the different people that are going to show up that day get the orders. And it's been, I think, a relatively successful program for the community, albeit with some limitations in it. But we found that it does really help get better access, and it certainly minimizes what would be more than an hour and a half, probably a round trip. And there's some more information about what we've done in Tionesta. I put a link in here, and when we share the slide, there's actually a small video that we have that if you want to reference it, you'll be able to get a bit of a sense from the community about what it is. But we started to recognize, we added a second location sort of on the way to Tionesta, and then we realized, well, there's no reason if we can go from Meadville over to Tionesta, there's no reason we can't go from other places to food access challenged areas right here in Pittsburgh. So why only Tionesta, right? And the reality is we just weren't sure how to engage. And so through some of the community learning that we've been doing, we're working to engage different parts of the communities here in the Pittsburgh area to understand how we could create similar models and deliver to them as well. And we think that this will ultimately create opportunities for those communities to get more access to fresh groceries, and not just access to groceries, but hopefully also solve some of the transportation issues and things like that they face today. As well as there's almost always food in the community, but it's not always the best food that would be available. And so it's not always fresh produce and things like that. And by being able to leverage what we've done with curbside and delivery, we believe we'll be able to serve a significantly greater amount of fresh produce and things like that into these communities. So we've got a whole bunch of different ideas that are underway right now, including drop-off points with community centers, but also looking at potentially senior living facilities and things like that, where again, it might be more of a transportation issue than anything else. looking at different housing complexes and things like that throughout different neighborhoods in the city that don't have good access. So that's what we're thinking about community-based pickup points. But there's a second part of this that we think is really critical, and that has to do with SNAP and SNAP acceptance online. So we think that's a fairly significant barrier. Arguably one of the upsides of the pandemic was that it enabled us to get, sorry, I went too fast. It enabled us to actually get the ability to offer SNAP online. It was in a pilot phase nationally. So for those who are not fully aware, there was a pilot going on with a few local retailers in the South, and then with Walmart and Amazon at a national level. And this is actually governed by the USDA and actually a group within that called FNS. And so they allowed waivers to allow people to accept SNAP online. And so we're in the process of working through that. But the reason that this is important is community-based pickup that we talked about can certainly help, with communities. But the map on the left here lays out, based on the USDA's what's described as low income and low access information. It describes the areas, I'll say, in southwestern Pennsylvania that are described as food access challenged today. So you can see, at least in the screenshot I took, that goes from Beaver Falls, in the northwest, all the way down to what would be about Mount Pleasant in the southeast and everything in between. We started to look at what we could do with curbside delivery coverage, and what we realized is our delivery coverage broadly already covers almost all of the food access challenged areas in southwestern Pennsylvania. But unfortunately, since we couldn't take online payment, we really, even though we might technically be able to bring food to you, if SNAP or EBT is the key way in which you pay for food and you access food, you really don't have access. So for all the delivery that we could provide, if you can't pay for it, or we can't accept the payment that you would like to use, it doesn't really matter the fact that we would be willing to drive there and already do. And so we've been down on this journey for the better part of 9 months now. We are relatively close to approval in the state of West Virginia, which we think is exciting, but then that will follow in Pennsylvania and then ultimately in Ohio. One of the things, though, that I think is worth pointing out broadly, though, is that this really requires several things to come together in order to do it, whether you're Giant Eagle or anybody else. You need the retailer to be able to do it. You need your retailer's payment processor to be able to do it. You need approval from the USDA, and you need approval from the state. And so it becomes relatively complicated to actually enable it. Again, not necessarily technologically, but from a pure regulatory perspective. It takes a lot of people working together to enable you to actually be able to take the payments. And so one of the things I think as a broader, food insecurity, food access, and food supply chain piece is, through the pandemic, you've seen massive increases in SNAP funding, different ways in which people are putting money into those programs, the government often putting money into those programs. But that alone doesn't solve an access issue, which in many cases, there's actually a technological solution already in place in many markets. I'm obviously talking about what Giant Eagle is doing, but many people have similar technology capabilities to help with the access issue. But payment really stands as a barrier to that. And so as we think about longer term regulatory frameworks and things like that, we would really champion open access, that when people have the availability to pay, that the retailers, whoever that is, be able to accept that payment, so that we could actually use some of the solutions that are already in place right now to really better enable people to get access. So as we move over the next couple of years, there's a large opportunity to expand into WIC, which is still restricted. There's opportunities to really formalize some of the things that have been enabled through the more recent pandemic legislation around SNAP, but that we'll want to formalize from a long-term perspective. So, there's lots and lots to think about it in terms of food insecurity, and we certainly have additional ideas and ways we can help based on our learnings from the community. But these are some nearer term things that we're spending our time focused on right now. But I think they tie to some really key long-term regulatory issues that as a broader food system, we all need to be thinking about because it's important part of expanding access. So, and with that, I'll take a break, and I think Dave is up next.
Yeah, thanks so much, Graham. Dave, you talk about Azoti and the first principles thinking that you've been applying to for sourcing.
Yeah, great. Great, everyone. Dave Rinaldo, CEO, founder of Azoti. Azoti is derived from the Italian word meaning nitrogen, which is one of the most abundant elements and essential for plant growth. It accelerates plant growth. And that's what we've been trying to do for local farmers really since 2012, and then 2015, we started leaning into it. This is not a simple problem. And my background has been in this e-commerce, e-procurement space since the late 90s. I actually cut my teeth with Ford Motor Company and helping them do a on-demand consumer ordering platform where a consumer would order a vehicle today. It then gets built and dropped off to you months later, right? Using this just-in-time, right, super efficient method. And what I was, in sort of piggybacking off what Graham and Allison said. By the way, Allison, I'm also in Columbus. Don't forget that. But yes, we're based in Columbus, Ohio here. I'm a Cleveland native and have been working with Food 21 since last July. So what I wanted to do today, though, was talk about, how do we, especially people in the audience there, like, how do we solve these problems? Graham, and Glenn, these guys solve problems. They're inventors, right? And Elon Musk and some of the greats call it first principles thinking, right? Gutenberg, Aristotle, this goes all the way back, right? And I first learned it actually on that Ford Motor Company. But basically first principles thinking versus thinking by analogy. Thinking by analogy is like, hey, what's everyone else doing? Okay, I'll incrementally do better, right? Copying in a way, which is fine for some solutions, but some that are deep rooted like this, why can't we get more locally grown food into everywhere? Require this kind of thinking. So, the first thing you need to do is identify and define your current assumptions, right? Test everything that you're thinking about what you know about this space, right? Then you break down the problem into its fundamental principles, and then you create a new solution from scratch. So I'm actually going to show everybody what Azoti has spent the last, at least 5 years doing to try to solve this problem. And the good news is there is a happy ending at the end here, and also a Giant Eagle partnership coming into 2021 here. So Azoti, our goal has been affordable, hyperlocal sourcing and storytelling, right? If you talk to people that own restaurants or anybody, it's like, why am I sourcing local if I can't tell people that I'm actually doing it, right? So it's a combination here. And so first principles thinking says, okay, well, we have eaters and we have small farmers. So how do I get the food to them, right? So one of the first things that we did, but this is going way back in the 2012 to 2014 timeframe, is we were just discovering that there were people who out there were willing to pay more for locally grown food. We always start with the demand in mind. Who is the end customer? What do they need? And if it's not a win-win relationship throughout the entire supply chain, then we don't do it, right? But we always think about the demand first, and we call them use cases, right? What specific individuals are going to want this kind of food? So we found that there were people saying that they'd pay more for locally grown food. Great. We went out, we found some farmers, and the farmer said, you know what, I'd love if I never had to go to the farmer's market. All right, so great. Let's do a home delivery of what's called a CSA food box. All right, this was farmers grow food, and whatever the farmers get or have ready, that's what goes out to the people. So we did a home delivery of customizable produce boxes. That's how we started. And this was a loser. The results came in is that people wanted they wanted convenience while they had nostalgia for the farmers, and the food did definitely taste better, and it cost a little bit more, not that much. They wanted more product variety, right? The farmers also said, we need more certainty of how much you want to purchase from us and what volumes, right? We have to plan, months and months in advance. So anything you can do to help us with certainty, I will give you huge discounts for certainty. So we said, okay, this model is not good for the farmers. It seems like it's a tiny niche market and really it's not scalable. So we're like, all right, scrap that one. Let's go to solution 2. Start again. Eaters. We need to add more farmers so that the CSA food box had meat and dairy and some other things. So we added more farmers. Then we had to partner with the distributor because now we have all these farmers. We have to consolidate all their supplies and make sure we can deliver around the city because we need to have more eaters ordering from the farmers for volume. So what we decided to do, and this is similar to what Graham was talking about with these curbside pickups, is we partnered with corporations and sold into their wellness teams as hey, what if your employees could get these CSA food boxes as a wellness benefit? Maybe you could subsidize it, which they did. Then the schools did it as a fundraising event, or like market day programs, if you guys remember those. So the schools did a fundraising event for the PTO and the parents bought them and a portion of the proceeds went back to the school. And we had these companies here. We actually got up to about 40 companies promoting to their employees and their school members. It did increase the amount of people purchasing the food boxes and we were really excited. However, again, win-win-win. So corporations, what do you need? Azodi, we needed to be a turnkey solution. So we created a suite of products so that it was easy for the wellness directors or the parents to manage the program. Distributors needed a small fee, no problem. And the farmers were like, all right, if you want me to do this, all right, we need certainty and volume. So then we implemented our first tool for this called demand planning, right? How can a group of small farmers demand plan from, potentially 1,000 eaters? So we created a tool that allowed the farmers to see what, when, and how much they needed to grow throughout the year based on consumers saying, I want this food. And the farmers, for that access to the data, they gave incredible prices, right? Farmers will do things if you give them certainty. They typically have to plant and pray today, right? So what happened? The eaters, when we aggregated all the demand plans, basically surveys for the eaters, versus what actually happened, we missed our sales by 40%. The number one issue during that time was there was too much food in the box. I had to go back and tell farmers, we didn't hit our numbers because there was too much food. You did too well, farmers, you did too good. And what ended up happening was people didn't cook at home as much as they thought. This is all pre-COVID, mind you. All right, so that was a loser. For us, basically, the eaters' desires didn't match their realities. And that typically happens. And, farmers get very happy and they're very optimistic, but this was a letdown. So like, all right, what do we do next? So there is a niche market. We can sell a little bit to eaters. There is something there with this CSA food box to eaters through these channels. But, why don't we try to sell to the cafeterias within those organizations, right? That makes sense. They buy volume, right? Ohio State, all these groups. And so the groups that manage the cafeterias for employers and schools, Aramark, Compass, and Sodexo are the big three, right? They're like 20 billion, 25 billion, and 20 billion, all right? Just to give you an idea. Sodexo manages 8,000 cafeterias across the United States, to give you a sense of scale. So why don't we just sell to the chefs at the corporate cafeterias, right? Seems like a no-brainer, right? Well, the chefs, the executive chefs were like, hey, this sounds good, but what happens if there's crop issues? I need something to guarantee that product is there. I can't be screwing around when the farmers have an issue. And then also my boss at corporate has some procurement contracts in place. What do we do there? So I'm like, okay, well, that's some hurdles we got to overcome. Then the next one was the distributors like, no way, Jose. They shut this thing down. One, they didn't know how to source from the small farmers, right? Usually they go, if they do local, it'll be some giant farm like Weir's Farm, which is a $50 to $100 million farm. And then they check the boxes local, right? Because it's hard to source from all these little guys. Plus, we were eating into some of their margin, right? And they didn't like that. We're like, okay, so we got some hurdles here. Then the farmers, they were like, I can't stand wholesalers. They broker me against my neighbors, right? So basically, when I talk about farmers planting and praying, right? They literally plant products and just hope to get phone calls or sell their stuff at the farmers markets. And typically a distributor, and again, this is just the nature of the business. This goes back decades, right? The distributors will call them up and say, "Hey, farmer, do you have any, how many cases of Aroma tomatoes?" And then they'll call the neighbor and ask them, and then they have the farmers competing with each other to lower the price. So we're like, okay, we got some problems here because right now this looks like a loser, right? This is not a simple problem. And I'm just giving you the thumbnail version. There's also IT issues, dirty data, hidden fees that people don't want to make transparent because they're getting squeezed by both inflation from their labor costs and their everything else. And then on the top, the big guys are always asking you to cut your costs. So what we did, and this was almost a 2-year effort, but we have built a platform which allows demand planning across the entire value chain so that the chefs and the farmers and the distributors all came to the table and we said, here is what the farmers, or here's how much the chefs want to buy, here's what the farmers can grow, and here's 25% for the distributor. And they were like, this sounds good. Those are sustainable profit margins. So we lock in the profits. It's the beginning of a contract for local farmers, which they crave more than anything. And then we created the next versions of Azodi, which we call dual sourced ordering. So the chefs are able to order both from the warehouse of their distributor and the fields of the farmer in a just-in-time method. And then we layered on demand plan accountability. So the chefs know that the farmers expect them to order, right? And how much are they falling behind? We implemented an auto substitution so that if the farmers had some failures, the distributors could easily replace the product. And to tell the story, right? The chefs, they're the chefs, right? And they have small staffs. They have one-click downloadable farm-to-table marketing materials they can post on Instagram or wherever they want to on site and everything else. So with this solution, right, we turned this into a winner. And we landed a deal with Sodexo Corporate in December 2019. We had a successful pilot, then COVID hit. And we're like, sweet, we can't scale right now because there's nobody going to cafeterias. And this, necessity is the mother of invention. And piggybacking on what Graham was doing, coming soon in partnership with Giant Eagle, Food 21, and Azodi, we are going to be launching Oasis Grocery Direct. And this is going to be a food desert eradicator. We are going to leverage everything that you guys just saw, including the local sourcing. And we're going to create a food fundraiser and community building program where any organization, literally any organization located in a food desert can become a pop-up grocery offering their constituents all the 600 SKUs of products, all the local guys, Giant Eagle private label products, at or below grocery store prices, and you can use credit, debit, or EBT. And like Graham said, this EBT process is very difficult. We're going to overcome that by giving the pickup. So imagine like a church runs this with their flock. The church leaders will get their own EBT card reader so that we can at least accept the cards on site. So this is coming soon. We hope to launch in May, and I think that's my time.
All right, thank you, Dave. Let's go straight to Glenn from In-City Farms to talk about how we can build year-round sustainable and urban agriculture. Glenn?
Yes, and boy, great having the opportunity to listen to everyone else and be at the end to hopefully, weave it all together. And I'm appreciative of the fact that Allison really started out saying there are some financing tools that can be available that could be helpful for those early stage companies, those entrepreneurs and others to hopefully then move that needle that would be there. And I think what you pick up from Graham is that there are a lot of very large companies that are trying to figure out ways to be more helpful. And maybe what he didn't mention that much is also Giant Eagle is quite interested in local good food too, that in turn can be retailed to people. And then David is obviously trying to find some methodologies to reach those spaces that that, let's say, the footprint of Giant Eagle does not touch, or that can somehow work in conjunction with, not necessarily different. all of this really reminds me of studying regression analysis when I was in grad school, which forces you to take into consideration a whole host of different needs and then to apply them for best outcomes in an area. And these, whether it be an inner city area, whether it would be something remote on a, in a rural area, or if you were in a Native American territory, whether it's on a reservation, I think what each of them cry out to say to everyone is that their economies need help. Food deserts are nothing but miners' canaries that are saying to us all that somehow that the full weight of our economy, why don't we call that $24 trillion, is not is not evenly laid out such that everybody can think of the best outcomes for their family and for their kids, and quite frankly for their businesses. And so these minor canaries happening around food, by the way, is really important because food of a $24 trillion economy, food is at minimum a $1.8 trillion part of it. Food is critical to the transportation industry. Food is critical to the warehousing industry and a whole range of others. And so as we start to wrestle with these issues surrounding food, it has ramifications for the whole economy, and that this is not just about solving a food desert issue in a community that is not as prosperous as the other ones. But this is also saying that there are going to be means that we can even bring fresher food, or quite frankly, improve the tax base of a state. Pennsylvania imports 92% of the edible food that it eats in the state from some other state. And so there is this opportunity that sits right in front of us in Pennsylvania to build these economies, and quite frankly, to use some of these neighborhoods that are left out, that as food is starting to migrate from the coast and it's coming to the Midwest and it's heading east, that if we utilize something like controlled environment agriculture and a whole host of other pieces, that we consider that and how we improve those local economies for benefit for all of us. And so I feel like if you will, this period that we're in I call it a selected moment. It's pregnant with opportunities. We have an opportunity to make some choices that are going to impact the next few decades. And that if we make these choices quite well, I believe that we can actually use this need to improve communities at large. And that's a part of what my company is about. It isn't just about, can we grow food that someone wants to buy? It is about then how does that then benefit the economy? Because in my mind anyway, there is a term in farming and it's called monocropping. Monocropping is where, look, you've got one thing in mind and you are only growing that crop. Well, if you do that over years and years and years, you literally rob that soil of nutrients. I think those analogies are absolutely the same for communities, that if we don't really help them and we only bring them sort of one solution, you heard Graham talk about SNAP and all those other tools. Those are really powerful tools. I am supportive of them. However, when you look at the preponderance of SNAP in a community, we have to start to look at ourselves and say, why is that necessary, right? And what can we do then to start to alleviate some of that? I look at the growth of food banks. Quite frankly, that is also an indication that some things aren't right. So to give you an example, food banks served 4.2 billion meals last year, and that's a lot. But quite frankly, that would only feed Americans if you fed all Americans through that particular number, all 3 meals, that would last for 4 days. All right. So what do we do about these other days? And so as we start to look at this supply chain that we are wrestling with, a whole lot of it is focused on a proprietary efficiency. And that is where there are a select number of companies that are helping to ship things from California that hopefully somehow is going to end up in the Midwest and on the East Coast. And hopefully, again, that it won't miss people living in selected neighborhoods. And so only by raising, I'm going to call it the overall economy of those local neighborhoods, will you really long-term solve those problems. I believe with the what I'm calling the migration of food back from the coast, there is absolutely the opportunity to do that. And I'm a believer in aquaponics because as we are also bringing produce, fresh, obviously fresh produce from that part of the country, we also have to start to figure out what are our protein sources going to be, and are there some real sustainable ways to do that? And I find aquaponics out of several of the indoor growing technologies that are continuing to grow. And I believe that that's good news for the economy, by the way. But as these are continuing to grow, I think that thinking about our protein and what's the most efficient way to get that protein is important. And when you look at raising fish, it is the second most efficient means of protein production in the country, beat only by chicken. And quite frankly, that's a neck and neck battle. There's not a huge difference between how efficient getting these two proteins to an economy it is. So again, Food 21 was founded on the opportunity to go out and find what I'm going to call these inefficiencies in a marketplace and to try to address it, to bring more production to the table. And at In City Farms, we are a big participant in that as well, with a huge outreach to community because I, again, grew up in one of those myself. And I didn't have to do a whole lot of research to know what those problems were about because I lived them every day. And we are really dedicated then to using our technology to really get at what I'm going to call these food deserts and these what I call nutritional malfeasance, that we can bring better food to people in these communities and everybody can win, but only when there's a collaboration between both the needs and the providers. And again, that's why I contend that Food 21 is that place where we can all meet and collaborate on how to solve our collective problems. And those are my points. Lastly, if I would close that up, however, I can't leave without getting an encouragement on the entrepreneurial side. I believe also that these economies are only going to get better if we start to embrace entrepreneurship, because if there were already these ready solutions that someone else had already figured out, they'd be more present. So you can't want better local economies if you want to ignore entrepreneurship, and there's a tolerance that I think we all need to become more accepting of. Thank you.
That's great, Glenn. Thank you so much. We did have several questions come in, but we are quickly running out of time. So Allison, if you could quickly comment on how supply chain limits or enhances local food initiatives based on your research, and they're particularly interested in regarding infrastructure, logistics, transport, et cetera.
Sure. I know whoever asked this question directed it towards me. I don't know if I'm actually the best person on this panel to answer a question like that. I think, we've all seen, especially in the past year, all the gaps in our supply chain and what's happened in light of COVID. And, that a lot of those, small to medium sized infrastructure pieces on a local, regional level all across the country are missing. But I mean, as far as getting down in the nitty gritty of how, supply chains work and, how those may impact local food initiatives, I don't have any concrete evidence. I know that there are a lot of people working in a variety of communities, such as right here in Pittsburgh with, Dave and Graham and Glenn and Food 21. But I don't have any hard and fast data or case studies at this very moment to show. But if somebody else knows of one that's been a success somewhere else in the country, I would be eager to hear.
Yeah, I think too in your white paper series, in the case studies, it did highlight the importance of infrastructure for these kind of projects. So whoever did ask that question, if you're interested, I encourage you to look into CDFA's white paper series. Graham, Sonia asked about how you were engaging people through your app or internet that maybe don't understand that technology super well. So what have your challenges been with that?
That's a great question. Honestly, I probably should have just addressed it because I get it all the time. It is, I think, candidly, it's an issue. Where we've been working with some of the different volunteer organizations locally is to try and help in different ways with them getting educated about the technology and then being able to educate people in their communities about it. We're certainly willing to do things as some trials to, we've talked about with different community organizations. We donate iPads, donate things like that to create access so that if you're going to pick up at a community center, you could actually go and order at that community center, even if you don't happen to have, access yourself. We think that's a potential option. We've actually run some other programs internally where we've created phone-in options where people can call in and say what they want, say what they wanted, and we could essentially place the order on their behalf. Frankly, I try to think about these a lot from a scalability perspective. And so the phone-in option works, that technically speaking, it works, but it doesn't scale very well, unfortunately. And so for as much as I like it as addressing an immediate need, we found that it just doesn't scale up very well. We actually found this at the beginning of the pandemic with overwhelmed phone lines of people who wanted to call in and use it. And we couldn't scale fast enough on that point. So I would love to tell you I have this problem solved, or that I know the person who has it solved, but it is not a completely solved problem yet. So that's an open item for us. So I'll leave it at that for the moment. Open to ideas though.
And Graham, one more about the Giant Eagle's delivery. How does the cost of that delivery work out, and how would that play into purchasing food through using your SNAP benefits online?
Yeah. So real quick on cost, the idea, at least behind the pickup points we've done and the ones we're proposing, is there's no cost for the pickup point, right? We work with the local organization, our cost to drive it there, and no fee to do that. Nothing marked up, same prices as in store, same discounts as in store, all of that kind of stuff. It should literally be no different than if you'd walked into our grocery store, except that you didn't have to. On the can you use SNAP benefits to pay for delivery, currently you cannot. So if you wanted, that's not the pickup point. That would be if you actually want it put on your doorstep instead of having to go to a community pickup point. At least in current state, SNAP can't be covered by that, though. Shame on me for not saying it before. I think that we should look at that as a legislative agenda. I don't know why not, but technically you cannot right now.
All right, Graham, thank you so much. We're going to have to end it there. It is just about 1 o'clock. Thank you, all four of you, so much for being here today, providing your perspective on the regional food supply chain. I'm just going to throw up this last slide. And it's gone. So thank you everyone for being here. This concludes our 5-part series of building a resilient food culture. We've been talking a lot about not letting this momentum or topics drop off. So we're very interested in continuing this evolving conversation. We're going to be reaching out to all participants and registrants throughout these 5 sessions moving forward to see what topics we've missed, what we didn't dive deep enough into, how we can take these lessons that we've learned, in the past 11 to 12 months and even beyond that, to make sure we don't repeat these mistakes and challenges and better plan for the future. So we'll be sending out a survey or some other instrument to gather your ideas. And, we plan on reconvening in April and early spring. And again, if you'd like to go back and watch any of the previous 5 sessions, the link is there for Food 21 website. All 5 sessions will be up there. And with that, thank you all so much for being here and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.